He had lived alone for 8 years, speaking only to his horses and the wind. But when they strung the Apache girl from the old cottonwood tree in the center of Cold Pine, Jed Harper knew silence had come to its end, because the men tightening the rope wore deputy stars, and the preacher saying the prayer had blood on his hands. The wind cut through the valley like a blade, each gust a warning that this land had no place for mercy. Jed stood by his wagon, a sack of oats in hand, when he saw her feet dangle. Not the quiet sway of someone already gone, she was still breathing. Just barely. He froze, the sack slipping to the dirt. Nobody came to Cold Pine for justice. Not anymore. Not since the sheriff had sold the law to the highest bidder. The girl's body jerked once, then again. Apache. His blood turned cold. Last time he saw a woman in a deerskin dress, his wife had still been alive. His hand moved to the knife at his belt. Not a thought, just muscle memory. The crowd murmured. Boots shuffled, but no one stepped forward. This wasn't a trial. It was a message, but something held him back. Maybe it was the way her eyes stayed open, unblinking through the noose. Maybe it was how the wind carried her silence like a song unsung. Or maybe it was the realization that no warrior ever begged, but this wasn't war. This was execution. And the girl hadn't even screamed. The town slept like it always did, shutters bolted, lamps snuffed out, silence stretched thin as paper. But Jed Harper wasn't sleeping. Not tonight. He lay in his cot above the stable, boots still on, staring at the beams overhead. The girl's face haunted the dark. Not her beauty, though. There was strength in her cheekbones, in the way she didn't cry, but the silence in her gaze. A silence that screamed louder than any noose could choke. He got up slow, quiet. Moonlight spilled silver through the cracks in the barn siding. His rifle stayed behind. He didn't need a bullet tonight, just a blade. Down the slope, past the dry creek bed and the leaning church, the cottonwood tree waited. Its limbs spread wide like it was always ready to take someone. No guards, no torches, just the girl's figure swaying softly in the breeze like she'd become part of the night. He moved fast once he got close, knife drawn, boots muffled by dust. One slice, clean through the rope, and she fell into his arms like she weighed nothing. A ragged breath escaped her lips. Still alive. She was light, skin cold, dress torn where the rope had rubbed raw. Her wrists were bound too. He cut those next. Worked slow so he didn't hurt her more. She didn't speak, didn't even open her eyes, but her chest rose and fell, faint as a whisper. Jed didn't look back as he carried her out of town. No need to. Cold Pine had made its choice. So had he. By the time he reached the edge of his land, the eastern ridge was glowing faint orange false dawn sneaking over the buttes. His cabin sat quiet, windows dark, chimney cold. Just how he liked it. He laid her on his cot, pulled the extra wool blanket down from the shelf, lit the small stove and poured water into a tin pot. The fire crackled soft. Her breath steadied. In the glow, he finally looked at her close. She couldn't have been more than 20. Apache for sure. Cheekbones like his wife's, bruises on her neck, blood at the temple, dirt ground into her skin. But beneath all that stillness, the kind forged in fire, not fear. He touched the scar across her palm. Old, deep, deliberate. A survival mark. Not the first rope she'd escaped, he reckoned. He sat beside her, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. 8 years alone, and now this girl was breathing his air, lying in his bed. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story. But he knew this. The men who hung her weren't done. And neither was she. Not yet. The fire was dying when she stirred. Jed had dozed in the rocking chair, rifle across his lap. The creak of old wood woke him first, then the soft rustle of the blanket. She was sitting up, barely, blinking at the shadows like she didn't trust they were real. Her mouth opened, cracked lips moving soundlessly before a whisper found its way out. "Where am I?" Jed didn't move. He let his voice carry low, steady. "My land. My cabin. About 6 miles north of Cold Pine." She blinked slow. "They hung me. They tried." Silence settled between them again. She didn't ask who he was. Didn't thank him. Just pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, like she wasn't sure if she was safe or not. Jed respected that. Trust wasn't free in these parts. Not anymore. After a long minute, she said, "My name's Nantan. It means spirit talker." Jed nodded once. "Jed Harper." She tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowing. "You ain't army number, but you cut me down. Seemed like the right thing to do." That earned him a faint smile. Not warm, more like someone remembering what warmth felt like. She looked down at her hands, the bruises on her wrists. "They said I stole a horse. That I was trouble." Jed leaned forward, his voice grave. "You did?" She didn't answer. Just stared at the fire like it held a secret only she understood. He didn't push. Some stories took time to bleed out. Instead, he poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. She drank slow, careful, then set it down with hands that trembled just once before stilling again. Outside, the wind had shifted. The clouds that had loomed all night were thinning. But Jed knew better than to trust clear skies in the west. "They'll come looking," she said finally. Not a question. "Yeah," he replied. "And if they find me here, they will not forgive you." She looked at him then, really looked, like she was measuring the shape of his scars beneath the quiet. Whatever she saw, it was enough. She nodded once. Short, Jed got up, stoked the fire, then walked to the door and looked out across the land. Empty. Still. But he could feel the wrongness in the wind. Towns didn't hang girls without backup plans. Tomorrow someone would ride out with questions. With guns. But tonight, under a roof he hadn't shared in years, a hunted girl was alive. That was enough. For now, at first light, the buzzards circled. Jed spotted them before he heard the hooves. 4 black shapes in the sky, gliding slow and deliberate over the south ridge. That meant only one thing in these parts: something had died, or was about to. He stepped onto the porch, coffee in hand, shotgun propped against the doorframe. The wind brought dust and distant echoes. Then, the faint rhythm of hooves across dry earth. Behind him, the floor creaked. Nantan stood at the threshold, blanket around her shoulders, eyes still sharp despite the bruises. She didn't ask what he saw. She already knew. Jed turned his head slightly. "Company. How many?" 3. Maybe 4. Moving slow. Like they're not sure what they'll find. She stepped onto the porch beside him, her face unreadable. "They'll burn your place down just to prove a point." Jed took a sip of his coffee. "Let 'em try." They stood in silence, watching the horizon. The horses appeared first dust-coated, lean and wired for trouble. The riders wore guns low and mouths tight. Sheriff Brackett led them, as expected. Same worn badge, same preacher's voice wrapped around a killer's instinct. He pulled up 5 yards short of the fence line, tipping his hat. "Morning, Harper." Jed didn't answer. Brackett continued, eyes scanning past him toward the cabin. "Heard there was trouble last night. Girl went missing from town. You wouldn't have seen anything strange out this way, would you?" Jed held his ground. "Plenty strange out here, Sheriff. Coyotes howling like ghosts, buzzards flying lazy. But no girl." The sheriff smiled thinly, but his eyes didn't. "Now that's funny. Some folks swear they saw tracks leading out this direction. Bare feet, small prints, fresh. You know anything about that?" Jed sipped his coffee again, slow. "Not a tracker, Sheriff. I deal in fence posts and horses." Brackett's smile faded. He looked to his men, then back at Jed. "Just so we're clear, harboring a fugitive makes you an accessory, even if she's Apache. Especially if she's Apache." Jed met his gaze. "You done?" Brackett chewed on that a second, then reined his horse around. For now, they rode off slow, but not aimless. Jed knew they'd be back with more men, with torches, maybe worse. He watched until the dust settled, then turned to Nantan. She didn't look scared. Just ready. "They're comin'," he said. She nodded. "Let them." And in that moment, Jed understood what kind of fight this was going to be. Not about guilt or innocence. Not even about survival. It was about refusal, refusing to lie down, refusing to vanish. 2 ghosts of the old world standing side by side on land that had forgotten kindness. The wind carried the echo of hooves long after the riders were gone, and the buzzards kept circling. That night, the wind changed. It blew east, hot and dry. The kind of wind that whispered of matches and revenge. Jed stood beside the barn, checking the lantern oil, when he saw the glint just for a second off glass far up the ridge. A scope. Watchers. They're setting up, he said aloud, though Nantan was already at his side. They'll wait until dark, she said, pulling the blanket tighter around her. Then they'll come with fire. Jed nodded. They want to make an example. From the edge of the barn, they could see the cabin, weather-beaten but sturdy. Built by hand, one beam at a time. By a man who thought if he worked hard enough, maybe grief wouldn't catch him. Now it might burn in a night. He turned to her. If you go now, follow the dry creek west. You might have half a day's head start. She didn't answer. He dropped his gaze. You don't owe me this. Her voice was calm. And you don't owe me either. But here we are. They went quiet again. As dusk fell, Jed opened the hidden trap in the barn floor. Inside, sacks of powder, coils of wire, and iron devices wrapped in burlap leftovers from an older life. Rail wars, they called them, blasting through mountains to lay steel. Killing men when negotiation failed. He hadn't touched them in 8 years. You built this place like a fortress, she said, crouching beside him. No, Jed replied. I built it like a tomb. I just didn't know it. They worked in silence. Traps laid. Fuses set. The barn wired to light the night sky if need be. After, they stood by the porch, the last bit of light draining from the world. What if they bring others? She asked. Then we'll teach 'em what it costs. In the distance, a dog barked. A signal. Then another. Echoed. Brackett's men were closing in. Jed lit a match and stared at the flame. It danced small in the breeze, fighting to stay alive. He let it burn down to his fingers before snuffing it. Get ready, he said, and somewhere deep inside, he felt the old fire stir again. Not anger, not fear. Just the clear, steady weight of purpose. The first fire started near the corral. Jed saw the flicker before he smelled the smoke. Then came the crackling dry grass igniting like paper, wind fanning it across the slope toward the barn. He didn't panic. Fire was an old enemy. Predictable. Hungry, yes but not clever. Men were the real danger. He stood at the fence, watching the fire line crawl. From the trees beyond, he could hear laughter. Brackett's men, drunk on power and whiskey, celebrating early. They think it's over, Nantan said, appearing beside him, face ghosted by the firelight. Jed nodded. We'll let him believe it. He turned toward the barn. Flames were creeping toward its northern wall. The charge inside wouldn't ignite yet, not without his signal. But if the roof caught, the whole thing could go. Time? She asked. Jed looked toward the moon, now high and bright. We've got minutes. He motioned her toward the cabin. Keep low. If the signal comes, don't wait. Nantan paused. And you? I stay. Her jaw clenched. You stay and die? He met her gaze. I stay and finish. She didn't argue. Just disappeared into the shadows. Jed turned back to the barn. The firelight danced higher now, flickering on the iron nails, licking up the edges of the haystack like a preacher reading scripture. He moved to the fuse box simple, wired to run down the slope, along the fence posts, into the base of the barn. He lit a stub of sulfur match. The wind threatened to kill it. He cupped it, waited. Then there. Movement at the tree line. Figures breaking from the brush. Rifles low. Boots fast. 6 of them. Now, Jed whispered. He touched the match to the wire. The hill answered. A thundercrack split the valley as fire leapt from the barn in a burst of light and debris. Men screamed, some thrown clear, others not that lucky. The hill shook. Horses bolted. Somewhere behind the flames, Brackett's voice shouted something that didn't sound like victory. Jed watched without moving. From behind the smoke, Nantan emerged, blood on her cheek, a knife in hand. 2 down by the west fence, she said. Rest scattered. He handed her his spare rifle. Let's end it before they regroup. And together, they vanished into the night, the rancher who buried his grief in dust, and the woman who refused to be forgotten. Some fights weren't about winning. They were about refusing to lose. The smoke hadn't settled when the spurs started ringing. Faint at first, metal brushing, rock then louder. Measured, not hurried. Jed froze behind a split-rail post, heart stilled. This wasn't Brackett's men. They shouted, cursed, kicked dust when they moved. This sound, who the hell? Nantan whispered beside him. Jed responded with silence. He already knew. There was a man silhouetted in dust outside Carson's Crossing, 10 years back, who'd ridden into a crooked sheriff's camp with no more than a cattleman's rope and a tired mare, and left with blood on his saddle and 4 lawmen dead. Jed never forgot that walk. Calm, rhythmic, the sound of finality, and now it echoed again. The spurs stopped. A voice came out loud, not sharp, just clear. Jedediah Kane. Jed stepped from behind the fence. That name's rusted. I go by Jed now. The figure emerged from smoke-long coat, dust-colored hat, rifle across his back. You always were better at burying names than burying trouble. Jed squinted. Caleb Brackett. The man smiled. You knew I'd come. Jed nodded. You always did like to watch your own fire from up close. Brackett looked around. You turned this place into a war field. Jed shrugged. World brought war to my gate. I just answered the knock. Behind him, Nanton stepped forward. Her knife was still red. Brackett's gaze flicked to her. So this is what you choose now? Bleeding out for ghosts and women. Jed didn't look at her. I choose not to run anymore. Silence stretched. Then Brackett stepped forward, slow. No rifle, he said. Just you and me, Jed. Like before. Jed dropped his repeater in the dirt. Fine. They stood 10 paces apart, 2 men whose lives had frayed down to this thread. Wind blew ash between them. A hawk circled above, quiet witness to what the world kept trying to forget. And then it happened. The shot echoed once, then silence. Brackett fell slow, like a man giving up more than blood. His revolver slid from his fingers, eyes wide not in fear, but in something older. Recognition. Jed stood over him, chest heaving. You shouldn't have come. Brackett's lips moved. Maybe a curse. Maybe a prayer. Then he stopped breathing. Nanton walked over, careful. You okay? Jed nodded, but it was the kind of nod a man gave a grave, not a friend. From the ridges, what was left of Brackett's men scattered. The fire had eaten half the corral. The barn was nothing but a black skeleton. But it was quiet now. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that meant the fight was over but peace hadn't come yet. Later, they buried the bodies. No markers, no prayers, just dirt, sweat, and the wind to remember them. Jed kept Brackett's hat, not for sentiment, just to remind himself what silence cost. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Nanton stood at the edge of the porch, baby in her arms. The child had slept through thunder, fire, and death. Now, she watched the sky like it owed her something. We'll head north at first light, Nanton said. Sister waits near Red Basin. Maybe start again. Jed watched her. You'll make it, she nodded. And you? He looked at the land. Scarred, burned, but alive. I'll ride south. Mary Hendricks still needs escort. Denver trail's long. Nanton's smile was faint. The lonely man rides again. Not lonely, he said, looking at the baby. Just unfinished. She reached out, touched his shoulder. It said more than goodbye ever could. The next morning, the trail split. One to the mountains, one to the plains. Jed rode westward, the sound of hooves soft against ash and gravel. Behind him, the wind whispered through broken fences, across burnt soil, over blood that would fade but never be forgotten. And ahead, maybe not peace, but purpose. Sometimes a man builds fences to keep the world out, but the real strength is in knowing when to open the gate. In the Wild West, justice ain't always about the law. Sometimes, it's about standing firm when silence would be easier. Because staying human means not forgetting what deserves to be remembered. Now, click on the video on the screen to hear an even better story than this one, with a twist so powerful you won't forget it. Click on the video. The lonely rancher had sheltered the wife of an Apache chief last night. The very next morning, 200 warriors came to take his life. Welcome to Wild West storytelling. Let's get started. That dawn carried no birdsong, no familiar scent of dry grass on the high plains. Instead, there was a heavy silence, so thick that Elias Ward felt as though the earth itself was holding its breath. He stood motionless inside his weathered gray cabin, his calloused hand trembling on a cup of cold coffee. Through the dusty window, a sight sent a chill racing down his spine. Hundreds of Apache warriors lined along the rotting fence, their faces painted in fierce colors, silent as living statues. No one moved. No one spoke. They only stared straight at his solitary cabin. Elias was no stranger to the desert's loneliness, nor to the wailing wind that howled through the cliffs. But he had never known a silence like this, the kind that pressed on his chest, the kind that told him a single wrong move could summon death. A former soldier who had tasted enough gunpowder and blood, he understood one thing. Silence was more dangerous than the roar of battle. One question tore at his mind. Why were they here? He was just an old rancher, living in isolation for 10 long years, keeping clear of everyone. Why would they surround him as if he were their sworn enemy? There was only one explanation. The night before, he had opened his barn doors to rescue a woman who had collapsed in the storm. He had given her shelter, even pressed into her hand his father's old dagger so she could protect herself. And now, with 200 blazing eyes fixed on his cabin, Elias knew. That woman was no ordinary wanderer. Thank you for allowing me to serve you tonight. All I hope is that you remain safe, and that happiness finds you, wherever you may be listening to this story. Elias Ward had lived alone on this land for nearly 10 years. Ever since his wife and young son had died from a winter fever, he had built high fences, planted a few apple trees, and locked his heart away as though it, too, had been buried alongside the 2 graves behind his ranch. The townsfolk called him the Old Wolf of the Dunes, half an insult, half a mark of respect. For anyone who could survive this long on the brutal frontier was not a man to take lightly. His wooden cabin stood solitary in a sea of dry grass, its back pressed against the red cliffs, its front opening onto plains that stretched clear to the horizon. Day after day, his world was nothing but the crow of roosters, the neighing of horses, and the endless whistle of the wind. Over time, loneliness became habit, and silence turned into his only companion. The night before, the sky had collapsed in a violent storm. The wind howled like a demon, thunder split apart the darkness, and lightning slashed through the heavens. While Elias was securing the horse stable, he caught sight of a figure staggering through the sheets of rain. A woman. Her long black hair clung to her pale face, her leather dress soaked through. She moved as though each step was a battle against some unseen enemy. "You need shelter," Elias rasped, raising his voice above the thunder. The woman turned, and in a flash of lightning, he saw her eyes deep, dark, filled with both fear and defiance. She shook her head and whispered, "I cannot stay. My people, they will worry." But then the icy wind struck again, and her body trembled. In that moment, Elias remembered his mother's words from long ago. When you see someone in need, do not ask who they are. Just offer your hand. Without hesitation, he unfastened the silver dagger at his belt, the only keepsake left from his father's days of war. He placed it in her hand, then draped a heavy wool blanket over her shoulders. "Keep it until the storm clears," Elias said. She looked at the dagger, her fingers trembling, as though it was more than a weapon, as though it carried the weight of an oath. When she raised her eyes again, her gaze pierced him, and Elias felt as if his scarred heart had just been touched for the first time in years. "I will remember your name," she whispered. Elias Ward. Before he could invite her into the cabin, she vanished into the storm like a ghost, leaving behind only hurried footprints in the mud. And this morning, 200 Apache warriors standing silent beyond the fence were the answer. That woman was no stranger. She was the wife of Chief White Crow, the fierce leader of the Apache in this land. Now Elias understood why the entire tribe looked upon him with suspicion, as if his single act of kindness last night had sparked a storm far more dangerous than nature itself. The wooden door trembled with a heavy rhythm. Elias set down his cup of coffee, his calloused hands clenching tight. He knew it was only a matter of time before he had to face them. Outside, horses stirred restlessly, but the Apache warriors stood still, silent as ghosts beneath the rising sun. Then, a figure stepped forward from their ranks, tall, broad-shouldered, draped in white wolf pelts, with eagle feathers crowning his headdress. His eyes were dark and unreadable, carrying the terrifying calm of a man who commanded hundreds of lives. "Elias Ward," the deep voice rang out, steady and sharp, without a trace of hesitation. "You know why we are here." Elias drew a slow breath, opened the door, and stepped onto the porch. "I do not," he answered, his voice rough from last night's whiskey, though his gaze did not waver. The chief gave a small nod, as if the reply only confirmed what he had already believed. "I am White Crow, and the woman you met last night," his eyes narrowed, sharp as a spear point, "is my wife." The words struck like a stone tumbling through a canyon. Elias froze, the image of the trembling woman in the storm flashing back to him, her hand clutching the dagger, her sad smile, her warning whispered in the wind. "If they know I am here, you will be in danger too." Elias swallowed hard and shook his head. "She was exhausted. I only gave her shelter. I did not know who she was." White Crow stepped closer, his expression calm but his presence storm-like. "The dagger in her hand, it was yours." "Yes," Elias admitted. "Only so she could defend herself." The line of warriors rippled with murmurs, like wind stirring restless grass. Among the Apache, a dagger was not merely a weapon, it was a vow, a sacred bond of trust. For an old rancher to place it in the hands of a chief's wife was nothing short of crossing into forbidden ground. White Crow's eyes narrowed, searching Elias as though he could peel away every hidden truth. "Do you know?" he said softly. "In our people, a woman takes a weapon only from the one she trusts with her life." Silence fell heavy. Sweat broke across Elias's brow, though the morning air was still cold. He had not meant to trespass into their sacred laws, yet the truth had dragged him into the heart of it. From within the ranks, a voice suddenly shouted, "If Naira was here, then he knows where she is." The name cut the air like a blade. Elias stiffened. Now he knew her name, Naira, and he knew this was no longer a matter of nameless kindness. White Crow raised his hand, silencing the warriors. His gaze locked on Elias, both a judgment and a plea. "My wife vanished last night. She has not returned to the camp, and you are the last man to see her alive." Elias swallowed the knot in his throat, his hand drifting to the grip of his revolver. In that instant, he understood. Fate had bound him to a storm from which there was no escape. "Amdakimcha." Elias could not remember when he had nodded. Perhaps it was in that moment when White Crow's eyes met his eyes that carried both threat and desperate plea. The eyes of a husband ready to turn the prairie into a sea of blood just to find his wife. The old loner had little left to lose, yet the instinct to survive would not let him refuse. And so, not long after, Elias found himself astride a horse, riding among the Apache warriors as they thundered north toward the land of stone and forest. The wind swept through the cactus thickets, carrying with it the pounding hooves that sounded like war drums. Elias felt the wary gazes of the warriors around him. They watched him as though he were a condemned man being escorted to the gallows. Yet strangely, deep inside, Elias felt more alive than he had in years. For so long, his mornings had been nothing but milking cows, and his nights, drowning in whiskey to forget the emptiness. Now, under the cold stares of 100 eyes, his heart beat fast, like the days of his youth when he carried a rifle into battle. The riders halted near a cluster of trees. White Crow dismounted and bent low, his weathered fingers brushing faint marks in the dry mud. He spoke softly in his native tongue, then turned to Elias. "Naira's tracks. She passed here, but she was not alone." Elias slid down from the saddle, straining to see. Indeed, larger footprints pressed deep into the earth beside hers. The memory of Naira in the storm surged back, her eyes wild with fear, her constant glances over her shoulder. Elias understood then. She had not been running from her husband. She had been running from someone else. She was afraid, Elias murmured, almost confessing to himself. "Not of me, but of someone chasing her." White Crow gave a brief nod, a rare flicker of agreement in his gaze. "You saw what I did not. Perhaps you are not lying." The admission did little to soften the hatred in the warrior's eyes, yet it planted something strange within Elias. The feeling of being heard. For years, no one had cared for his words. Not even he had bothered to listen to himself. That night, they camped by a stream. Elias sat alone by the fire, turning an old pipe between his hands. He listened to the horses breathe, to the men speaking in a language he only half understood. In that moment, he realized he was standing on the border of two worlds. One of loneliness that had imprisoned him for a decade, and another of fierce but unbreakable kinship. And between them, a mysterious woman who carried a storm in her shadow. Elias drew a long breath of smoke and lifted his eyes to the vast, starless sky. He knew then, if Naira was still alive, he would have to follow this trail with them to its very end, not to save her, but to uncover why fate had dragged him, an unknown hermit, into this game of life and death. Thank you for being here. If this story has stirred memories of days long gone, of dusty sunsets and the echo of hoofbeats in your heart, then subscribe to my channel, so that every day we can sit together once more, and I will share with you another tale of the Wild West. By noon the next day, the sun poured fire onto the prairie, scorching the earth beneath their horses. White Crow's party rode into a narrow canyon, its cliffs rising sheer on both sides, the wind screaming through like a funeral trumpet. A chill ran down Elias's spine. He had been a soldier once, had seen many battlefields, and he knew this truth well. Where silence lingered too long, death was waiting. Suddenly, an arrow whistled past, striking hard into a tree trunk inches from Elias's face. An instant later, war cries exploded through the air, shadows leapt from the cliff walls, and a rain of arrows and spears came down like a storm. "Ambush!" an Apache warrior shouted. The riders scattered at once, raising spears and drawing bows in a desperate defense. Elias threw himself from his horse, pressing flat against a boulder, his hand reaching for the worn rifle at his side. The crack of gunfire split the chaos, smoke filling the canyon, mingling with the screams of men and the shrill cries of horses. But in the torrent of arrows, Elias's sharp eye caught something wrong. One Apache among their ranks was not panicked. Standing on a ledge above, he moved his hands in subtle gestures, signals, clear and practiced. Battle signs. "Betrayal," Elias muttered, his blood turning cold. He sprang up and roared toward White Crow. "Look there! One of your own, he is guiding them." White Crow's gaze snapped to where Elias pointed. In an instant, his face twisted into fury. He drew his bow and loosed an arrow like thunder. It struck deep into the traitor's shoulder, flinging him from the cliff. The cries of the ambushers faltered, shaken at the sudden turn. They had not expected their inside man to be exposed. The Apache warriors seized the moment, counterattacking with brutal force. Elias, though long removed from real combat, steadied his rifle and fired, cutting down an enemy warrior whose spear had been aimed straight for White Crow's flank. When the dust began to settle, the canyon was littered with corpses, the stench of blood heavy in the air. The survivors fled into the forest, but through the groans of the wounded, Elias heard something that froze him still. The fallen traitor was not yet dead. Gasping for breath, he whispered a single name, "Naira." Elias dropped to his knees, clutching the man's shoulder. "Where is she?" The traitor's lips twisted in a ragged smile, blood trailing from the corner of his mouth. "She is the bait, and you have walked into the trap." His eyes went wide, then dimmed to nothing. Elias lifted his head and met White Crow's darkened stare. He knew then this ambush was only the beginning. Their enemy did not merely seek to capture the chief's wife. They wanted to destroy the Apache tribe itself. And now Elias, too, had been drawn into the bloody game, where a single misstep would cost him his life. The smoke still clung to the canyon, leaving a bitter stench on the sun-scorched stone. White Crow stood in silence over the traitor's body, his face unreadable, though his eyes burned like embers buried deep in ash. He gave no order for burial, spoke no word of mourning. Instead, he turned to Elias, his voice low and rough. "You have seen it. There are those within my own tribe who would sell their blood for power. And my wife, she is in their hands." Elias wiped sweat and gunpowder dust from his brow, his heart still pounding. He wanted no part of this. Yet in White Crow's gaze he saw more than anger. He saw the raw pain of a man terrified of losing the one he loved most. It was a pain Elias knew all too well. The day he buried his wife and son beneath the same mound of earth. "Where have they taken her?" Elias asked, his voice hoarse. White Crow bent to the ground, tracing the print still pressed into the damp soil. Smaller footsteps dragged hastily, mixed with the heavy boots of men. "To the west," he said, "to the valley of Horsebones." The name made several warriors shudder. Elias glanced at them, not understanding, but their faces told him enough. That valley was a cursed place, where an entire cavalry had once been swallowed by a sandstorm. The Apache believed the spirits of those warriors still wandered there. They chose that valley because they believe fear will keep us away. White Crow went on. But I will go. And you, Elias Ward, will go with me. Elias tightened his grip on the rifle slung across his shoulder. He could have refused, turned back toward his lonely ranch, left them to their fate. But the image of Naira in the storm returned, the fear in her eyes, the trembling hand clutching his dagger as if it were her last chance to stay alive. She had not only taken the relic of his family, but also carried with her a promise left unspoken. Very well, Elias said simply. I will go. That night, as the party camped at the forest's edge, Elias sat alone by the fire. White Crow approached, setting down a small leather pouch beside him. Inside was a silver necklace, carved with the shape of a crow. Naira's, he said. She would never abandon it, unless she was forced. Wear it. Perhaps it will help you remember her, when the time comes. Elias closed his fingers around the pendant, its cold weight seeping into his chest. He looked at the Apache chief, the same man who hours before might have killed him without hesitation. Now they sat side by the same fire, bound by a shared fear, a shared purpose. In that moment, Elias understood. He was no longer the forgotten rancher, lost in the emptiness of the prairie. He was part of the search now, part of the tribe's fate. And the road to the Valley of Horsebones would decide not only Naira's future, but his very life. The road into the Valley of Horsebones was like a descent into hell. The wind screamed, whipping red dust into blinding clouds, while bleached white bones lay scattered across the ground like grim reminders of death's visit long ago. Riding among the Apache warriors, Elias felt his chest tighten. He thought of the graves of his wife and son on the hillside, of the years of solitude he had spent hiding a shattered heart. Then a cry rose from the front. Tracks! White Crow spurred his horse forward, pointing to drag marks etched into the sand. The riders surged after him, and at the valley's end, they saw Naira bound to a wooden post, her face weathered but her eyes still burning with fire. Around her stood the traders, their blades gleaming in the dying light. The two sides faced each other in the blood-red glow of sunset. A voice rang out, taunting. Lay down your weapons. White Crow, kneel and confess defeat, and your wife lives. Tension strung the air tight as a bowstring. Then Elias urged his horse forward, his rough voice echoing through the canyon. You are mistaken. This woman is not only the wife of a chief. She is proof that honor and loyalty cannot be traded away. The words, spoken by a nameless, solitary rancher, fell over the valley like thunder. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. White Crow turned to Elias, his eyes flashing with something between shock and respect. The battle erupted with fury. But this time Elias no longer felt like an outsider. He charged in, cutting down an archer aiming for Naira, then slashed through her bindings with his own dagger. Naira collapsed into his arms, her eyes blazing with trust. I knew you would come. When the dust settled, the betrayers lay bound, and Naira was safe within the circle of her people. White Crow placed a heavy hand on Elias's shoulder, his voice resonant as a war drum. You have saved my wife. But more than that, you have saved the honor of our tribe. From this day on, Elias Ward, you are no longer the lone man of the prairie. You are our brother. Elias said nothing. The wind carried the songs of the warriors, mingling with the thunder of horses. In that moment, he understood. Kindness, even the smallest act, could bend the course of fate. A dagger offered in a storm had turned a broken man into one who had rediscovered the meaning of life. That truth echoed within him like a flame that would never die. Sometimes, mercy does not only save another, it saves yourself. The sun sank slowly behind the distant mountains, painting the Valley of Horsebones in a sea of blazing red and orange. The Apache warriors gathered around the fire of victory, their drums and songs echoing through the open air. In the circle of flame and shadow, Elias Ward sat in silence, his hand wrapped tightly around the dagger that had returned to him. Upon its scarred steel blade, the sunset glimmered as though retelling the story that had just been written. White Crow approached, leading Naira beside him. The chief's face bore the lines of hardship, yet his eyes shone with pride. He placed a firm hand on Elias's shoulder, his deep voice solemn and warm. From this day, you are no longer a stranger. You have shed blood with us. You have risked your life for one of our own. Elias Ward, You have a place in this fire. Naira tilted her head gently, her dark eyes resting on Elias. It was no longer the look of terror from the storm, but a gaze filled with gratitude and respect. She placed the silver necklace carved with the crow into his hand. Keep it, to remember that on a night of storm and fear, you chose mercy instead of turning away. Elias hesitated, his hand trembling as he closed it around the pendant. For so many years he had locked himself inside grief, believing there was no place left for him in the world. Yet tonight, beneath the firelight and the voices of the tribe, he saw the truth. Even the smallest act of kindness could open a door, guiding a man from darkness back into the light. He lifted his eyes to the burning sky and allowed himself a faint smile. Perhaps I am not alone anymore, he thought. The Apache set out toward the horizon, carrying with them the story of an old rancher who dared to stand on the edge of life and death for the sake of honor. And from that day on, across the harsh frontier, people spoke of Elias Ward by a new name. Brother of the White Crow tribe, a message to the audience. In the storm-torn West, sometimes a single act offering a hand in the rain or placing a dagger into another's grasp can change the course of destiny. Elias had lost everything, yet through mercy, he found a greater family and a reason to live again. If you have ever felt lost or alone, remember this. One act of kindness can open a new path. Thank you for following this story. If you wish to hear more journeys from the frontier where men and women must choose between fear and courage, then subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. Every word you share is a flame that keeps these tales of the Wild West alive. I paid exactly $22 for a ranch, but the first thing I saw was a girl hanging from a rope just outside the gate, and it didn't end there. She wasn't just any girl. Welcome to Wild West storytelling. Let's get started. Late afternoon on the prairie. The sun poured down hot and gold, as if it meant to burn the earth bare. Elias Ward eased back on the reins, his horse blowing hard after the long ride, red dust clinging to his old leather coat. Ahead, the weathered gate of a ranch came into view, a spread of 100 acres he'd bought that very morning for exactly $22. He figured he'd find nothing more than a few rotting boards and a crooked roof. But then he saw it. From the doorway of an abandoned barn, a body hung limp, bare feet swaying in the hot wind. An old rope bit deep into her neck. Beneath her lay a broken chair, and beside it, a scorched plank with black letters scrawled in a rough hand. Traitor. Death is the punishment. Elias didn't hesitate. He drove the horse forward, hit the ground in one stride, and had his knife out, steel flashing once before it sliced clean through the rope. Her body collapsed into his arms, light as a dry branch. Her breath rattled, the skin around her neck dark with bruises. The smell of hay mixed with the faint tang of blood. Kneeling in the dirt, Elias pressed his mouth to hers, forced air into her lungs, then slammed his fist hard into her chest. A cough tore out of her, eyes fluttering open, dazed, fixing on him. Go, get out, she rasped, voice raw and thin. Elias held her firm, his eyes like flint. No one hangs a person on my land and walks away. The wind shifted, knocking the wooden sign against the post with a hollow clack. A ranch for $22, and a life nearly lost on it. Elias began to wonder what kind of shadows were hiding behind the bargain he'd bought. I'm grateful you've given me the chance to share this with you tonight. Tell me where you're listening from, and I hope, wherever that may be, you're safe and happy. The girl was still trembling when Elias helped her into the main house. The roof leaked. The plank walls were cracked. The damp smell of rotting wood mingled with the cold, dead scent of an unused hearth. He set her down on a long bench and handed her a canteen. She drank in small sips, her eyes never leaving the door, as if she feared someone might burst in at any moment. Who are you? Elias asked, his voice low just enough to drown out the sound of his own heartbeat. Lydia Kane. She set the canteen down, her thin hands still shaking. And this used to be my home. Elias narrowed his eyes. Used to be? Lydia gave a faint laugh, but it carried the taste of bitterness, until the Maddox family took it. My father tapped a deep water vein under this land, enough to keep the whole town alive through the drought. He meant to sell the water at a fair price. Maddox wanted it all for himself. She paused, swallowing hard. One day, the well collapsed. They called it an accident. But I know, it wasn't. On the day we buried my father, Maddox came with transfer papers signed in a hand that wasn't mine. I never signed, but they forced me out anyway. Only, Lydia's eyes met his. Steady, I never truly left. Elia stayed silent. In her eyes, he saw something he'd once stared at in the mirror during his darkest years when you've lost everything, yet still force yourself to stand straight. So, today's hanging? He asked. A warning. Her voice dropped. They've been searching for that water vein for 3 years. I have my father's map and his geological surveys. No one but me knows where they are. And today, I guess they decided to scare me into disappearing for good. Outside, a gust of wind drove red dust through the open window, rattling the warped frame. Elias looked out over the bare, open fields. He'd bought a patch of dirt for cheap along with a fight that wasn't his. But in the West, trouble didn't always come to ask your permission. Sometimes it came to see if you deserved the ground you stood on. Do you have anywhere else to go? Elias asked. Lydia shook her head. Only the well, and the men willing to kill for it. Elias leaned back against the wall, feeling the thump of his own pulse. Never had a land deal left him feeling indebted. From far off, along the trail leading into the ranch, a sound began to roll in hoofbeats. Not fast enough to be urgent, but not slow enough to be the gate of travelers, either. Elias and Lydia locked eyes. Both understood. This wasn't a neighbor come to welcome the new owner. The hoofbeats grew louder, carrying across the open ground like war drums before a storm. Elias stepped onto the porch, narrowing his eyes toward the dusty trail. Far off, 3 riders took shape, red dust boiling up behind them. Harper. Lydia's voice was a rough whisper. Elias glanced at her. You know him? Wade Harper, Maddox's longtime enforcer. If he's here, it means they've picked up the trail. She moved quickly to the corner of the room. From beneath a worn rug, Lydia pulled a small wooden box. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a roll of parchment and several yellowed sheets of paper, the ink faded with age. The water vein map, Lydia said, unrolling it across the table. The meticulous lines showed every twist and turn beneath the earth, special marks indicating key points. It took my father nearly 10 years to measure, drill test holes, mark every branch, every feeder vein. The main line runs right under the north pasture. Elias studied it closely, realizing this was more than a map. Clipped to the edge were detailed notes on depth, capacity, and methods for channeling the water. If this ever fell into Maddox's hands, the whole region would be under his thumb. Outside, the hoofbeats stopped. A man's voice called out rough, but clear. Ward, heard you just bought this ranch. We need to talk. Elias looked at Lydia. She hurried to roll the map back up and slid it into a narrow gap beneath the floorboards. He won't leave until he's torn this place apart, she said. Elias stepped onto the porch. The 3 riders were lined up. Harper in the center, brim of his hat pulled low, eyes squinting against the glare. The 2 men beside him stayed silent, hands resting easy but ready on their revolvers. What do you want? Elias asked evenly, his own hand brushing the Colt at his side. Just heard there's a stranger holding something that doesn't belong to him, Harper said, smiling without warmth. You bought this place fine, but there's something here that needs to go back to its rightful owner. Elias didn't blink. Sale papers are at the town office. Go ask there. Harper gave a dry chuckle, like sand sliding in a pan. I'm not talking about the land, Ward. I'm talking about water. In that moment, Elias knew Lydia had been telling the truth. Maddox's men knew about the vein, and they'd do anything to get it. Harper didn't dismount right away. He leaned forward in the saddle, resting both hands on the horn, his gaze sweeping over the ranch as if he already knew every grain of wood and every crack in the boards. You know, he said slowly, out here in the West, water's worth more than gold, and something that valuable, it doesn't just fall into the hands of a stranger. The 2 riders beside him split apart, one drifting along the fence line, the other heading toward the old well. They moved like men on their own land, not bothering to ask. Elias kept his voice even. You're standing on my land, Harper. Best you ride off would be better for everyone. Harper's mouth curled. Number, I think. I'll stay a while. At least until I find what I came for. Inside, Lydia shifted slightly. The floorboard hiding the map was still loose, and she knew a single careless step could give it away. Elias glanced back over his shoulder, his eyes giving a clear signal. Stay still. Harper urged his horse forward 1 step, the iron shoes striking the dirt with a sound like war drums. "Ward, I'll give you a chance. Bring the girl out here, hand me what she's holding, and we'll ride away, peaceful." Elias didn't answer. He rested one hand on the porch post, fingers tapping lightly, an old habit when he was weighing his options. He knew Harper wasn't after the map alone. The man wanted control, and a man like that never rode off just because you told him to. "No one here but me," Elias said, voice flat and steady, like water from a deep well. Harper chuckled, but the sound never reached his eyes. He tilted his head toward the man searching by the well. "Check around the house. Take your time. If Ward's got complaints, fire a warning shot." The man started toward the steps. Elias shifted just enough to block the path, his hand resting near the grip of his revolver. The whole yard sank into a thick, heavy silence, broken only by the wind, knocking the wooden sign against the post. Clack. Clack. Inside, Lydia heard every word, every pause. She bit her lip until she tasted blood. 3 years on the run had taught her one truth. When Maddox's men find you, either you run or you fight. But this time, she wasn't alone. Harper tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "I'll warn you, Ward. Water always finds its way back to its rightful owner. And if you try to hold on to it, you'll be buried beneath this very ground. I'm grateful you're here. If this story has stirred memories of the old days, the red-dusted afternoons, the echo of hoofbeats in your chest, then subscribe to my channel, so each day we can sit together again. And I'll share another tale from the Old West." Elias stood square at the base of the steps, body angled just enough, his eyes locked on the man closing in. "I won't say it again," he said, voice as flat and hard as whetstone. "Step back." The man froze mid-stride, glancing toward Harper. Harper didn't answer right away. He stepped down from the saddle, slow and deliberate, the jingle of the spurs on his heels ticking like a countdown. When his boots hit the dirt, less than 3 paces separated them. "You think," Harper said, eyes narrowing, "a bargain land buyer can hold on to something the whole territory's hungry for?" Elias didn't blink. "I think a man like you ought to think twice before stepping onto my ground." A gust of wind swept through, carrying the smell of scorched grass and dry dust, tugging at Elias's coat. Harper's hand found the grip of his revolver, thumb flicking the leather strap loose. The tiny click rang out like thunder at high noon. Inside the house, Lydia pressed the map tighter beneath the floorboard, heart hammering. She knew a single moment's hesitation could cost them both. And then her foot shifted. The floor gave a faint, betraying creak. Harper's head snapped toward the door. "So, not just you." Elias didn't move, but his hand slid closer to the butt of his Colt. "Could be a cat. Or could be your own shadow." Harper's smile was thin. "You're betting your life on a lie." He motioned to the man on his left to circle toward the back door. Elias knew if that happened, Lydia would be trapped. He took one step forward, cutting off the path entirely. "No one searches my house while I'm standing here." The air was thick as tar. 3 men squared off, hands hovering near their guns, eyes unblinking. One wrong sound, and blood would hit the dirt. Then from a distance the sound of other hoofbeats broke the standoff. Faster, heavier, more of them. Harper tilted his head slightly, brows drawing tight. Elias could hear it too, at least 4, maybe 5 horses, riding hard straight for the ranch. "Friends of yours?" Harper asked, his tone gone sharp. Elias didn't answer. But inside, Lydia whispered just loud enough for herself. "Sheriff." The hoofbeats came faster now, pounding like war drums. Harper turned, squinting at the plume of dust rising on the east trail. Moments later, 5 riders broke into view. At their head was Sheriff Colton Bennett, his long coat snapping in the wind, the silver badge on his chest catching the light. Bennett didn't slow right away. He brought his men in close, fanning into a half-circle that cut off every escape from the ranch. Winchesters came down from saddle scabbards, barrels leveled straight at Harper and his men. "Wade Harper." Bennett's voice rang hard as steel. "Take your hand off that gun and step back." Harper gave a low chuckle, but his hand stayed where it was. "Sheriff, I was just having a friendly word with the new owner here. No need to turn this into something bigger." Bennett's tone sharpened. "It got big the day you and Maddox sabotaged the Kane well and killed Thomas Kane. And today, I've got a witness." A wave of silence rolled over the yard. Lydia stood in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame, her eyes wide. Harper kept the smile, but his shoulders tightened. Your witness? Some old drunk, I suppose. Pete Harden. Bennett shot back. He was right there, saw you pull the brace, saw the well cave in while Thomas was still down there. And now, with his word and the papers on that water vein, I've got enough to hang Maddox's whole crew. Harper's eyes flicked to Lydia, sharp as a blade. Papers, huh? He turned back to Elias. So, you took in this little snake and kept her under your roof? Elias didn't move. I'm just keeping what belongs to its rightful owner. Bennett's reins creaked as he tightened them, his horse pawing the dirt, kicking up dust. Last chance, Harper. Drop the gun. No one needs to die today. But Elias saw the glint in Harper's eye, the cold, familiar flicker of a man who'd rather die in a blaze than swing from a rope. Harper knew that if he let himself be taken alive, the gallows awaited. And men like him drove first. His hand flexed. His shoulders shifted. Elias slid a half step to the side, bracing for the break. The air was thick enough to split. Then Lydia stepped out of the doorway, empty-handed, but her voice was steady. Enough. You want the papers? They're right here. Elias snapped his head toward her, eyes flashing with disbelief. Harper turned slowly to face her, his smile sharpening like a knife. Lydia stepped slowly down the porch steps, her eyes never leaving Harper. In her hands was a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, tied tight. Let Elias go, she said, and you can have what you came for. Harper's mouth curled, like a wolf catching the scent of blood. You see, Ward, women always know how to end things. Elias tilted his head, his voice low but cutting. Lydia, don't. No choice. She cut him off. Harper moved in, his hand leaving the gun grip to take the bundle. But before he could touch it, Sheriff Bennett's voice rang out. You might want to think twice, Harper. That bundle is just one more piece of evidence to put you on the gallows. I've already got a witness now, I'll have the papers too. Harper froze, anger flashing in his eyes. Evidence. Don't mean a damn thing if the one holding it is dead. His hand snapped to his revolver, fast as a striking rattler. Elias lunged sideways, shoving Lydia clear. The gunshot cracked like a whip, the bullet tearing through Elias's sleeve. In that same heartbeat, Bennett and two deputies fired as one. Harper jerked back, blood blooming bright against the dust on his coat. He staggered, eyes full of hate, before crashing to the dirt. Hooves pounded as his men threw down their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. Sheriff Bennett swung down from the saddle, motioning for the others to shackle the survivors. He turned to Lydia, his voice softening. Miss Kane, I'm sorry justice came late, but now we can see this through. Lydia unwrapped the bundle, revealing the rolled parchment and her father's detailed notes. It's all here, proof my father struck the vein, and that Maddox killed him to take it. Bennett nodded, passing it to a deputy to seal. I'll present this to the territorial court. With this and the testimony, Maddox won't have a hole to crawl into. Elias pressed a hand to his grazed arm, blood seeping between his fingers. Lydia stepped to him, her hand closing around his, worry and gratitude mingling in her eyes. If it weren't for you, he gave a faint smile. This ranch is mine. Anyone who hangs a person on my land, we settle accounts. Bennett mounted up, signaling the escort to take the prisoners and Harper's body away. When the dust of their departure settled, only Elias and Lydia remained on the porch, the wind of the setting sun carrying the scent of dry grass and gun smoke. Sunset stretched across the fields, turning the red dust into a ribbon of glowing gold. The hoofbeats of the sheriff and his escort faded toward the horizon, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy, yet strangely lighter. Elias leaned against the porch post, his left shoulder still bleeding through the tear in his shirt, but his eyes more at ease than they had been in years. Lydia stepped out, carrying a clean strip of cloth and a bowl of warm water. She knelt, carefully washing the wound. You know, she said softly, for 3 years I never thought I'd live to see this day. The day the truth was finally spoken out loud. Elias looked out at the field, where the last light of day danced over the tall grass. Truth usually comes late, but it comes. The question is who's got the grit to wait for it. She looked up, catching his gaze, and in it she saw not just determination, but something warmer. And now, what will you do with this land? He gave a faint, crooked smile. First, I think I'll fix that gate. Then patch the roof. And the well. Maybe it needs someone who knows just how precious it is to watch over it. Lydia tilted her head, a slight curve at her lips. Sounds like you're hiring. Elias offered his calloused hand. "I think this ranch is big enough for two people who know how to work and how to keep their word." She placed her slender hand in his, giving it a small squeeze. "Deal." Above them, the first stars began to flicker. The night wind carried the cool, damp scent from deep underground, a quiet promise that the water still flowed somewhere beneath their feet. Elias drew in a deep breath, feeling for the first time in years that he wasn't standing alone against the wind. Their shadows stretched long across the earth, two very different people, bound by the same thing, a will that refused to bow. And out here in the West, sometimes, that's all you need to start a new life. You know, out here, land and water are worth plenty, but the rarest thing of all is a soul willing to stand and fight for what's right. Sometimes what you buy with money is just the excuse fate uses to bring you face to face with someone who shares the same vein of courage. Like sitting beside the fire tonight, I've come to understand, the most valuable thing a man can keep isn't land or gold. It's a promise, and a hand you can hold till the very end of the trail. Once again, I'm truly honored to have you here. Tell me what you felt in your heart as you heard this story. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Type Ina if you enjoyed it. And don't forget to subscribe, so you won't miss the next thrilling tale from the Wild West. The people of Silver Creek cheered before the gallows, believing that justice had finally been served. What they did not know was that the man beneath the noose was no ordinary criminal. He was the chief of the Apache, and if he fell, thousands of warriors would come to level the town. Welcome to Wild West storytelling. Let's get started. The town square of Silver Creek was packed shoulder to shoulder. Red dust swirled in the scorching heat. On a hastily built wooden scaffold stood an Apache man with long hair, sun-darkened skin, and both arms bound tightly behind his back. A coarse rope was drawn tight around his neck. His deep black eyes held an eerie calm. The townsfolk had no idea. The man they were about to hang was no ordinary prisoner. He was Nate, chief of the Apache. Below the scaffold, the crowd screamed in rage. Someone hurled a shattered bottle near the wooden steps. A widow shrieked, "Kill him! He murdered the Whitmore girl. Blood must be paid with blood." The roar surged like a crashing wave. No one questioned why the bloodied knife was mysteriously clean. No one wondered why Apache feathers were found exactly where the body lay. They just needed someone to blame, and they had their Apache standing right there. In the crowd, Jonas Clay stood silently. The solitary man rarely cared about who the town chose to hang. But when his eyes accidentally locked onto the condemned man's face, something stirred deep inside. Those were not the eyes of a killer. They were the eyes of a leader, proud and calm, even in the face of death. On the edge of the square, Bentley, the notorious copper mine owner, stood with arms crossed, a cold smile curling at the corners of his mouth. No one knew he was the one pulling the strings behind this bloody show, and when the rope tightened, he would be the first to profit from the war that was about to erupt. "Thank you for allowing me the honor of being with you tonight. Let us know where you are tuning in from. Wherever you may be listening, I wish you peace and happiness." Jonas Clay leaned casually against a wooden post, his cold gray eyes watching the scene unfold. Folks called him the crazy cowboy, a man no one dared get too close to. 10 years ago, Jonas had been a frontier soldier. He had known many Apache chiefs, including Naish. He knew the silver-haired leader before him was no bloodthirsty savage, despite what the people of Silver Creek were shouting. But saying that out loud now would be no different than slipping his own neck into the noose. Naish, leader of the Chiricahua Apache, was known for his calm wisdom. He had always tried to avoid conflict, had sent messages calling for peace talks, hoping to preserve the valley lands for his children and theirs. But the greed of white men was louder than any promise ever made. And now, here he was, strung up like a murderer, paraded before the town for sport. In the distance, Bentley, the copper baron and richest man in the region, stood in the shadowed balcony of the Treasury building. His gray suit was pressed clean, his boots polished to a shine, his eyes cold as steel. The townspeople saw him as a savior, the man who brought jobs and prosperity to Silver Creek. But Jonas knew better. Bentley was a wolf dressed as a businessman. In his possession were mining maps showing rich veins of copper lying directly beneath Apache land. All he needed was a reason, an excuse to take it, and the death of the Whitmore girl was the spark he had been waiting for. Her body was found near the edge of Apache territory. Next to it, a freshly bloodied hunting knife and a few Apache feathers scattered on the ground. Too perfect. The kind of scene designed to lead to only one conclusion. The Apache killed her. No one asked why the knife looked unused, why the clues were so conveniently placed. In their anger, the town did not want the truth, they just wanted someone to blame. Jonas glanced toward Naish. The old chief stood tall, eyes forward, not begging, not pleading. That kind of posture belonged only to a leader. Jonas remembered the last time they met at the border. Naish had told him, "If you have any conscience left, hold on to it. Someday, you will need it to save your own soul." Now, as he watched that man stand beneath the noose, Jonas felt his own conscience being pulled taut. Beyond the square, the vendors had fallen silent. All of Silver Creek had gathered, eager to witness justice for a red man. They had no idea the real killer was Bentley, still smiling coldly, and that this hanging was nothing more than one move in a grander game, a play to seize the Silver Valley for himself. The pounding of the drum echoed like hammer blows on a coffin. The hangman placed his thick hands on the lever, waiting only for the judge's nod to kick the platform out from under Naish's feet. The crowd pressed in tighter, shouting themselves hoarse, "Kick the stool! Justice for the Whitmore girl!" The air was feverish with rage so hot and heavy that no one noticed the sweltering sun burning down on their necks. One more breath, and the rope would turn a tribal leader into a hanging corpse. In that sea of people, Jonas stood motionless, his gray eyes locked onto Naish's face. The old chief stood proud, lips pressed together, his posture steady, not like a man about to die, but like someone quietly observing his own fate. In the moment their eyes met, Jonas saw something deep and endless. Not fear, not pleading, but a silent message. "You know I am innocent." Jonas froze. Inside, a voice rang out. "If you stay silent now, this valley will drown in blood. You will not only lose an old friend, you will lose your soul." Suddenly, Bentley stepped forward, voice ringing with authority. "People of Silver Creek, today, we witness justice. The Whitmore girl has been avenged, and from now on the Redskins will know this land belongs to us." The crowd erupted, stomping their boots like thunder. The hangman prepared to pull the lever. Jonas gripped his revolver. He hesitated for a heartbeat, but then came the memory. A house in flames. That night his wife and son were killed in a senseless act of vengeance. He knew if the rope tightened around Naish's neck, history would repeat itself. "Stop!" Jonas roared, his voice rough and cutting through the chaos like a whip. The entire square fell silent. Hundreds of eyes turned toward him. The mad cattleman no one dared to cross. Jonas stepped out from the shadows, walking straight toward the gallows, hand resting on the Colt at his hip. "He did not kill the Whitmore girl," Jonas said firmly. "You've all been played. The knife wounds, the tracks, they were planted." The crowd burst into jeers. A few men began to surge forward, but Jonas drew his revolver like lightning and fired a single shot into the air. The crack of the gun exploded through the square, and silence dropped like a hammer. Naish lifted his head and looked at Jonas. For the first time, a flicker of hope sparked in the old man's eyes. Up on the balcony, Bentley's lips curled into a faint smile. He knew the game had just gotten a whole lot more interesting. Jonas's gunshot was still echoing when the square erupted into chaos. People screamed. Some cursed. A few drunken farmers shouted, "This lunatic is defending the Redskins. Shoot them both." The deputy sheriff clenched his jaw and barked to the guards, "Take him down." But Jonas had already stepped up to the gallows, gun drawn and ready. His cold gray eyes scanned the crowd like a lone wolf holding back a pack of mad dogs. He growled, "Anyone takes another step, I will blow their damn head off." A heavy silence fell. Above them, the rope was still taut, death only a lever pull away. Naish tilted his head slightly, his lips pressed into a firm line. In a single glance between him and Jonas, an unspoken agreement passed. Jonas drew his knife. With one swift cut, the rope snapped. Naish dropped hard onto the wooden platform, coughing, his breath broken and shallow. The crowd roared, furious like animals robbed of their kill. "Traitor!" someone shouted. "Shoot him! Shoot them both!" Clicks of cocked guns rang out from every direction. Jonas yanked Naish to his feet, shielding him, and fired back. A bullet slammed into the platform just inches away, wood dust flying everywhere. The crowd scattered in chaos. Jonas leapt off the gallows, dragging Naish behind him. He could hear his heart pounding like hooves. his black horse still tied near the saloon. Gritting his teeth, Jonas pulled Naish through a hail of stones and bullets. From the balcony, Bentley watched it all with cold amusement. He murmured to his aide, "Let him escape. The more chaos we have, the easier it will be to claim the land." Jonas and Naish finally reached the horse. It reared back, then galloped down the dusty main street. Bullets tore through the air behind them. Shouts chased them, but after a few turns, they vanished into the night on the town's edge. In the darkness of a narrow canyon, Jonas pulled the reins and stopped. Naish slid off the horse, collapsing to the ground, coughing violently. His trembling hands clutched the rope marks still red on his neck. Jonas knelt beside him and handed over a canteen. "Drink, then tell me, what the hell is going on?" Naish took a long breath. His eyes still glowed in the shadows. His voice came hoarse. "This was a trap. I came to Silver Creek for peace talks. But someone killed the Whitmore girl and left Apache signs behind. They want blood. They want my people erased from this land." Jonas clenched his fists, eyes flaring with anger. He had suspected it, but hearing it from Naish drove the truth in like a knife to the chest. And in his mind, he saw Bentley's cold smile. This game was far from over. "Thank you for being here tonight." If this story stirred memories of the old days of dusty afternoons and the sound of hoofbeats echoing in your heart, I invite you to subscribe to my channel, so each day we can sit together again, and I will tell you another tale from the Wild West. Bad news travels faster than desert wind. Before the first light of dawn touched the horizon, horse traders along the border were already whispering. Chief Naish was hanged by the people of Silver Creek. No one mentioned he had been saved by Jonas. All they spoke of was the noose and the roaring crowd from the night before. That rumor, carried by fire and smoke, passed through canyons into every Apache camp. In less than a day, war flags rose high across the valley. Thousands of warriors painted their faces red. War drums thundered. Horses screamed. Rage spread like wildfire, reaching every tent. To them, the death of their chief was the death of their very soul, and the people of Silver Creek would have to pay the price. Back in town, fear and hatred surged just as fast. The townsfolk built barricades out of wagon parts. Sandbags lined Main Street. Sharps rifles were handed out to every household. Church bells rang loud and fast, like the end of days had come. The deputy sheriff stood in the center of the square, yelling above the panic, "The Redskins are coming. We must defend Silver Creek with our blood. This is our land, not theirs." The crowd roared again, but in many eyes, the fear was clear. They all knew once the Apache charged, the town would become a river of blood. In the dark canyon, Jonas and Naish sat by a small fire. Naish's voice was low, his eyes fixed on the horizon where signal smoke curled upward. "My people already believe I am dead. If they attack, it will not just be Silver Creek that suffers. Apache women and children will fall too. And that is exactly what the greedy ones want." Jonas nodded, his hand tightening on his gun. "Bentley." He spat the name like something bitter. "He planned it all. He killed the Whitmore girl, then framed your tribe. He wants war so the government can take the land, and he'll buy it up for pennies." Naish was silent for a moment, then turned to Jonas. "Then what will you do?" Jonas took a deep breath. His eyes were cold as steel. "I won't let history repeat itself. Not this time. Innocent blood won't be spilled just so one rich bastard can get richer." In the darkness, two men, an Apache chief who had survived the noose, and a lone cowboy, became the only ones who knew the truth. And now, they would have to face not only the fury of a town and a tribe, but a wolf in a fine suit, ready to devour the whole valley with bottomless greed. From far away, the Apache war drums pounded, and in the wind, the church bell tolled. War stood at the doorstep. Night fell heavy over Silver Creek. In the darkness, Jonas and Naish crept silently toward Bentley's copper mine. The lights were still on. Figures moved busily, escorting heavy wooden crates down into the shafts. Jonas narrowed his eyes. The faint scent of gunpowder drifted on the wind, sending a chill down his spine. "It's not just copper," he whispered. "He's stockpiling weapons." Naish nodded slowly, his weathered hand gripping his spear tightly. The rope marks still showed deep on his neck, but his eyes burned with fire. He knew only the truth could stop the blood tide rising toward his people. They crawled along the rocky ridge, through a window, Jonas could see Bentley speaking with two government officials. A large map lay spread out on the table, red lines marking Apache territory. Bentley's voice echoed, "When the war begins, the government will seize the land, declare it abandoned. I meant, then we'll bid on it, and that silver vein under the valley will be ours. Don't worry, a few corpses in Silver Creek is a small price to pay for a fortune." Jonas clenched his fists, blood rushing hot. He turned to Nate, eyes flaring. "Did you hear that? He killed the Whitmore girl to start all this, just to swallow up your land." Just then, a noise behind them. They spun around. A guard had spotted them. A gunshot cracked through the night. The bullet grazed Jonas's shoulder, blood spraying. He fell back, but fired his Winchester as he hit the ground. The guard dropped, but the shot had already raised the alarm. Nate pulled Jonas to his feet, and they ran, vanishing into the shadows of the forest. Lights flared behind them. Bentley's furious voice rang out, "Bring them back alive. Do not let that plan leak." There. As they fled, Jonas pulled a bundle of papers from his coat, the documents he had managed to grab from the table. Proof, undeniable, that Bentley had conspired with government men to steal Apache land. They took shelter in a rock cave. Jonas, breath ragged, shoulder bleeding, tossed the papers in front of Naish. "This is the truth, but if we don't show it to both the tribe and the town, it's just a pile of worthless paper." Naish stared at the words, then slowly nodded. "By tomorrow, Apache and Silver Creek will be at each other's throats. We must step forward before the blood spills. You and I will face them together." Jonas looked at him, conflict in his eyes. He knew he had stepped into the biggest game of his life, but if he turned back now, the valley would become a grave. The night wind howled through the canyon, carrying the distant beat of Apache war drums like thunder. By the flickering campfire, the shadows of two men burned against the stone wall, a lost cowboy and a nearly hanged chief, now allies in a battle to reveal the truth. Before the sun even rose, the valley outside Silver Creek thundered with the beat of Apache war drums. Thousands of warriors on horseback, faces painted red, spears raised high. From the town, church bells rang in alarm. Townspeople flooded into Main Street, clutching rifles to their chests. Two waves of fury, poised to crash and drown everything in between. On the balcony of the Treasury building, Bentley stood tall in a crisp gray suit. A cold smile curled on his lips. To him, this was nothing but a poker hand, and he was holding the winning cards. One gunshot, he thought, and the land will be mine. But before the storm could break, a lone rider galloped into the clearing between the two forces. Jonas, his coat dusty and blood-stained, sat firm atop a black horse, a bandage wrapped tightly over his wounded shoulder. Beside him, Naish rode a gray steed, the deep red noose marks still clear on his neck. They stopped where both sides could see them. A wave of shock rippled through the Apache ranks. Their chief was alive. Gasps rose from the town. The man they thought they'd hang now sat proudly on horseback. Jonas raised the bundle of papers high above his head, his voice hoarse but strong. "You've all been lied to. These are contracts between Bentley and government men. Plans to steal Apache land once war breaks out. He killed the Whitmore girl, planted fake evidence, and pushed all of us into the slaughter." The crowd stirred. Confusion swept through both sides, but Bentley roared from the balcony, "You believe a madman and a redskin? Kill them. Now," he signaled. Dozens of rifles from his private guards leveled downward, but before a shot could be fired, Naish rose up in his saddle and tore his shirt open, revealing the brutal marks across his neck. His voice thundered like a storm. "You call this justice? These marks are proof I was hanged for a lie. If my blood is spilled here today, it will not be for an innocent girl, but for the greed of a man who wants to devour this valley whole." Apache war cries erupted. Spears trembled in the air. The people of Silver Creek glanced at one another unsure. They could see it now, those bruises were real. The truth stood naked before them. Bentley's face drained of color. He screamed in fury. "Shoot them, shoot now!" Gunfire cracked. Smoke burst into the air. But this time, it was not between Apache and townsfolk. It was between Bentley's men and those who had finally seen the truth. Some townspeople turned their guns on Bentley's guards. A firefight exploded in the golden morning light. Jonas charged up the steps, firing round after round. One bullet struck Bentley in the shoulder. He stumbled back, papers scattering like leaves. Naish rode hard to shield Jonas, his spear striking down a rooftop shooter in one swift motion. Gunpowder smoke, screams, thundering hooves, and through it all, the truth finally broke free. For all to see, who had truly driven them into this river of blood. The sun rose over the ridge, casting a fiery glow across the valley still thick with the smoke of gunfire. The battle was over. The bodies of Bentley's gunmen lay scattered across Main Street, blood soaking into the red dust. The townspeople of Silver Creek stood in stunned silence among broken bricks and shattered glass. The Apache warriors, still painted in red, sat quietly on horseback, not thirsting for more blood, but wide-eyed with the shock of how close they had all come to ruin. Bentley was dragged out in chains and thrown into the center of the square. He still tried to protest, his voice shrill. "You need me. Without me, Silver Creek would starve. I brought jobs to this town." Jonas stepped forward, gripping his shoulder tightly. His voice was ice. "You brought death, Bentley. The death of an innocent girl. The death that almost swallowed this town and this tribe whole. All for a damn silver vein." Naish walked forward. The red rope mark still ran deep across his neck, a stain that would never fade. He looked at Bentley for a long time, then turned to face the people of the town. "You called me a murderer. You cheered when I stood under the noose. You wanted my blood to ease your fear. But now you see the truth. It was the greed of one of your own that nearly burned this valley to ash." The crowd lowered their heads. Some couldn't meet his eyes. The air grew heavy, as if all of Silver Creek realized they had cheered for an innocent man's death. Jonas lit a cigarette, took a long drag, and turned away. He never wanted to be a hero. He had simply stumbled into fate's game. But in those cold gray eyes, for the first time, there was peace. Naish returned to his people. The Apache cheered at the sight of their chief alive, but he raised his hand to silence them. "Peace is not a gift," he said. "It is not mercy. It is a choice. And today, I choose to keep this land with truth, not blood." That afternoon, the barricades came down. The Apache rode back to the valley. The townspeople quietly swept the streets. No one spoke it aloud, but all knew it. Blind hatred and ignorance had nearly destroyed them. Jonas rode out of town at sunset. His shadow stretched long across the dusty road. He said no goodbyes. He did not look back, but from afar, Naish watched him go, his old warrior eyes full of quiet gratitude. In the wind of twilight, a voice whispered the story's end. In the West, the true enemy doesn't always come from the other side. Sometimes, he wears a familiar face, a clean vest, and smiles like a friend. And justice, it doesn't always hang from a noose, or sit behind a judge's bench. Sometimes, it rests in the hand of the one brave enough to cut the rope. Out here in the West, they say justice hangs from the barrel of a gun, or the knot of a rope. But the truth is far crueler. Justice is easily bent by greed. And when the truth is buried, one wrongful death can turn a whole town into a bloodbath. Naish didn't die under that noose, but the red scar across his neck will always remain, a reminder that what truly destroys a man isn't the bullet, but the blindness of letting others do the thinking for you. And sometimes, to protect peace, you don't need an army. You don't need a judge. You just need one soul brave enough to speak truth, even as the crowd screams for blood. It's been an honor to share this story with you tonight. If this tale stirred something in your heart, let me know in the comments. Type 1 if you enjoyed it. And don't forget to subscribe channel for more thrilling Wild West stories. Still to come. I paid $5 for a ranch, but when I stepped inside, I found 2 Apache girls hanging from ropes in the middle of the house. And when I cut them down, I opened the door for a nightmare to walk into my life. Welcome to Wild West storytelling. Now, let's begin. Red dust curled in the air under the pounding of hooves, carrying with it the searing heat of the afternoon. Elias Ward pulled back on the reins, stopping before the sagging wooden gate of an abandoned ranch, the piece of land he'd just bought for exactly $5. To most folks in Dust Hollow, it was nothing more than a pile of rotting boards. But to Elias, it was a chance to walk away from a blood-stained past. The front door resisted with the groan of rusted hinges as he pushed it open. Light leaked through gaps in the weathered planks, spilling across the center of the room, where 2 bodies hung, swaying gently, not cold corpses. Their eyes were half open, breath ragged, rope biting deep into their throats. 2 Apache girls, one older, one younger, their bare feet just inches from the floor, kept alive only to prolong the torment. Elias lunged forward, pulling his hunting knife. The first rope parted under the blade, and the younger girl's light body collapsed into his arms. Blood from her shoulder soaked into his sleeve. He spun to the older one. Her deep black eyes locked on his, the look of a wild creature that hadn't yet decided if the man before her was savior or predator. The rope fell. She stayed on her feet, one hand braced against the wall, the other gripping the knife hidden in her boot. Outside, the wind carried the sound of horses, distant at first, then closer and closer still. Ahioka, the older sister, rasped out each word like it was clawing the air. "They're coming. And if you stay, you'll die with us. I'm grateful you've given me the chance to share this with you tonight. Tell me where you're listening from, and I hope, wherever you are, you're safe and happy. Wherever you are listening to this story." Elias eased Naira, the younger sister, down onto the floor, where thin shafts of light slipped through the wallboards, painting dusty gold stripes across the planks. Her left shoulder was torn open, the blood dried into a dark crust. He knelt, pulling out a handkerchief and wrapping the wound tight. Naira said nothing, only trembled faintly when his rough hands touched her skin. Ahioka, the older sister, still leaned against the wall, her black eyes cold as a winter lake. Her long black hair was tangled, her cheeks marked with the rope's bite. In her hand, a dagger caught the light each time a sunbeam slipped through the warped frame. "You're not one of Maddox's men," she said, her voice hoarse but certain. Elias shook his head. "Never met the man." Ahioka didn't answer, only tilted her head, as though she was listening for more than just words. Outside, the evening wind hissed through the gaps, carrying the scent of dry earth and burned grass. Elias stepped to the window, peeling back a warped plank. The ranch lay bare before him, an empty corral, a leaning storage shed, a fence line broken like it had been through a season of sandstorms. Far off, the red hills rose, glowing under the last hard light of the day. Dust Hollow, the nearest town, was only 2 hours by horse. There, the law lived on paper, but reality was decided by how many guns you could line up on your side. Elias knew the name Maddox, a greedy mining boss who'd bought half the town, including the deputy. Rumor said he was hunting something valuable enough to trade an entire stretch of land for blood. Elias Ward knew that kind of life all too well. 5 years ago, he'd been a bounty hunter, riding from Kansas to New Mexico, tracking men both the law and decency had given up on. It paid in gold, but it cost him friends, and any chance at peaceful sleep. This $5 ranch was supposed to be his way out, or so he'd believed. Naira's hand found Ahioka's, whispering something in Apache. Ahioka replied briefly, then looked at Elias with a gaze equal parts gratitude and guarded caution. The hoofbeats outside were clear now. Not one horse, but many. The rhythm was steady, disciplined, not drifters. Ahioka drew another knife from her boot and handed it to Naira. Her eyes flicked to Elias, heavy and certain. "They've been chasing us for 3 days. They tortured us, and they're not leaving without something to show for it." Elias tightened his grip on the hilt of his own blade. He knew the kind of men coming. The only difference was this time, the fight wasn't for a bounty. It was for 2 strangers, in a house he'd just paid $5 to call his own. Outside, the hoofbeats came heavy and deliberate, mingling with the dry clink of saddle gear. Elias pulled the window plank back into place, not wanting the glint in his eyes to give away their position. Ahioka stayed close to her sister, both knives hidden neatly in her hands. "You have the right to walk away," she said, her voice low and strangely calm. "If you stay, you'll be pulled into a fight that isn't yours." Elias gave a faint, dry smile. "I thought quitting bounty hunting would keep trouble off my back. Then I paid $5 for this place, and it's got more trouble in it than any head I ever hunted." Ahioka said nothing, but her gaze flickered just for a moment. A minute of silence passed, broken only by the wind seeping through the cracks in the wall. Then she spoke slowly, each word dropping heavy as stone. "We were taken because we know the way into the Spirit Mountain." Elias narrowed his eyes. He'd heard folks in Dust Hollow speak of a mountain the Apache called the grave of their ancestors, a place no outsider was ever meant to set foot. But Ahioka's tone wasn't campfire legend. "That mountain's not just a burial ground," she went on. "Inside is the largest silver vein in the West. Our people kept it secret for hundreds of years, so it wouldn't be mined so the spirits could rest. Maddox wants that mine, and he'll kill anyone who stands in his way." Elias glanced at Naira. The girl clutched her wound, eyes wide afraid, yet bright when the mountain was mentioned. And only you know the way in? Ahyoka nodded. A narrow pass, open only in the rainy season, and only our people can read the signs. Maddox doesn't need a map. He needs us. Outside, the horses stopped. A man's voice rang out, deep and thick with menace. Ahyoka, we know you're in there. Take me to the mountain, and I'll let the cowboy live. Elias muttered a curse, his hand settling on the butt of his gun. He hadn't bought this ranch to be someone's shield, but there was something in that voice, in the way it chewed each word, that made the blood in his veins run hot. Ahyoka met his eyes, her guarded look gone for the first time. Help us reach the mountain, and you'll walk away from this hole. Elias answered with a small, firm nod. Outside, the crunch of boots in the sand was already moving toward the door. The shadows of mounted men